accurately do you think you see the world? This isn't a question about how accurately you physically see the world, although that's included. It's about your overall thoughts and perceptions about the world. If you think it's pretty accurate, you're not alone. In fact, research shows that when assessing how accurately we see the world, 63% of participants said they had objective, meaning true or accurate, assessments. 13% of participants had a more modest view, believing there to be some accuracy to their views. 4% of participants recognized that sometimes their beliefs were inaccurate. There's a name for this belief: naive realism. It's the idea that our beliefs, thoughts, and perceptions of the world are true. In other words, our thinking represents the world as it objectively is. There's a few things about findings like this that are interesting, but for the point I'm trying to make today, I want to focus on how we handle views that are different from our own. If naive realism is true, then there really shouldn't be any differing thoughts. Put another way, if I view the world in an objectively true way, and other people do too, then we should all agree. But obviously, we don't. There are other thoughts and opinions in the world. The way our brains handle this problem is to say, I think in an objectively true way, and other people's thinking is distorted. Can we know what other people are thinking? We start to develop the ability to conceptualize what other people think and believe, as well as an understanding of the connection between thoughts and behavior as young as 2 years old. This ability becomes reliable between the ages of 3 and 4. This means that we can understand that other people have different information than we do, have unique experiences, and have different goals consistently by or around preschool. Even with this ability, it's easy to view our thinking as completely accurate or as the only way to think. We can take our worldview for granted, particularly if we're surrounded by people who are like-minded. It also means that we can get pretty stuck in our ways and not see the legitimacy in what others have to say. As a cognitive scientist, I read and conduct research that shows our minds work differently from one another, not just on superficial things like whether pineapple on pizza is good, but in how we fundamentally experience the world. I'm going to highlight this for you using research on perception and imagination. What do you see if I ask you to imagine an apple? How clear of an image do you have in your mind? Do you have one at all? It turns out how clearly we can imagine something is actually a spectrum. When I say imagine something, I mean any sensory experience, so this includes things like touch and smell. However, the majority of the research seems to focus on imagining something visually. Around 1% of the population can't imagine anything. These individuals will report that they are aware that they are thinking of the object they're supposed to be imagining, but they won't actually see anything in their mind. This phenomenon is called aphantasia, from phantasia meaning mind's eye, and meaning not, so not in mind's eye. There's mixed evidence on how many people with aphantasia have similar experiences with other senses, or if they are unaffected. I want you to take a second and make a prediction. Do you think that people with aphantasia can see in their dreams? Well, research shows that they actually can have dreams with visual qualities. In fact, most do. However, relative to people who can imagine images during the day, and the group I'm going to talk about next, people with aphantasia have dreams with no visual element more often. They are also more likely to be unable to recall their dreams. This finding might seem surprising, but it comes from the fact that the way the brain works while awake and during rapid eye movement, when dreaming occurs, is different. Alternatively, some individuals report that they can picture something so clearly that it's like either having a photograph in the mind or truly seeing it. This is more common. Between 2 and 6% of the population has hyperphantasia. If you don't feel like you fall into either of those categories, then you're like most people and you fall somewhere in between. But you might also fall into another interesting category, synesthesia. Synesthesia is when one element of your everyday experience is strongly associated with an unrelated element. To put that less abstractly, people with synesthesia are the ones who report hearing a sound and then seeing a color. How do we know aphantasia is real? How, as researchers, do we know that people really don't imagine anything when we ask them to? How do we know for sure if people are actually imagining anything? This is actually a tricky question because we can't be in someone else's mind, like watching a TV show of what they're thinking. There's 2 basic strategies. Just ask them, and find other, more objective ways of measuring it. The first one is really simple. Researchers just had people imagine 16 different things, and they asked them to rate how well they could picture each image. This research is supported by replication, meaning the just ask them approach has been used multiple times. Additionally, this research has been completed on very large samples, so a lot of people, which would also increase confidence. To additionally help support the just ask them approach, some researchers are trying to find more clear-cut measurements. One example is that participants were read very scary stories. Participants who reported being able to imagine things had an increased galvanic skin response, which is simply sweating. This is a strong choice in measurement because galvanic skin response is involuntary. Participants who reported aphantasia did not sweat. The thinking here is that because the aphantasia participants couldn't see the story, it was less intense to experience and therefore not sweat producing. There is also other research on involuntary responses, like pupil dilation. How does naive realism and aphantasia relate to your business? Here's what I want you to take away from this, other than some cool imagination facts. You cannot take for granted that other people see the world in general, and your business in specific, in the same way you do. This is true beyond opinions. It's as fundamental as how our brains literally process information. This might mean that your employees have unique and good ideas about how to solve problems. It might mean that your customers aren't buying your product because the label is hard to read. It might mean that your clients aren't booking because it's too complicated. It might mean many different things, as there are many unique situations. The solution to this not knowing how other people feel is to gather evidence, particularly from a large enough group of people. That said, the aphantasia research is a prime example of how complicated addressing these kinds of questions can be. How do we know what other people are really thinking? This is where a cognitive scientist like myself comes in. I'm trained specifically in how to create research that addresses how and what people are thinking, and in how to analyze and interpret that research. You've heard me talk about this a bit already, where I talk about mixed results and large sample sizes. These skills allow me to look at the inner workings of your business and find the areas where there might be trouble, especially when you're too close to see it. Before I wrap up, I want to make a quick note about statistics. Anytime I talk about a specific statistic, like 4%, you should take that as an approximate. If the same researchers were to conduct the exact same project many times over, but with new people, these numbers would vary somewhat. This is true for any statistic you see from anyone. That said, I'd love to know what areas in your business do you think you're taking for granted. If you're curious about taking these ideas further, I share more about my work and how I help clients at emilymolenbeek.ca. You can also reach me at any time at research@emilymolenbeek.ca. Thanks for listening.